self-sabotage.
Mm.
And there was just a certain phrase in the way that he put it. It's like the idea of you know, how we, like, you obviously talk about the subconscious beliefs and the behaviors, and, you know, if they're moving in different directions, it creates that pull.
Mm.
So it was just it all sort of just clicked into place. And I realized, I was like, oh, okay, so on some level I've bought into this idea that I'm not enough.
Mm.
Yeah. So it's not that I'm not good enough. It was interesting. I'm like, I'm not good enough. I'm like, no, this doesn't resonate. It's, I'm not enough. So I don't know. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Mm.
So where is that showing up for you in your life?
So many areas, like, you know, handicapping myself with my business, handicapping myself with that conversation with Ben, even with my own fitness goals at the minute, like, you know, my compliance is up and down, like course completing courses, it's like, you know, actually following some things. So, you know, I bail out because I feel like on some level I'm not enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to prove myself right on that.
Yeah. So where does that come from?
Sorry?
Where does that come from?
I sat back and I had to think about, you know, whether or not this is some like narcissistic childhood issue that I may have. Because I remember as a kid, I had a lot of trouble making friends. Like, I found social situations really overwhelming. And I remember the first time feeling like I wasn't enough was when I moved to a new school. And, like, for the first good couple of weeks, I really didn't talk to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How old were you?
I was 9.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, like, I mean, first day at new school, the girl that was going to show me around the school left me behind, so I was late back to class. Yeah. That was, like, traumatizing for me because I was such a teacher's pet, the idea of rocking up to class late. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what was the belief that you created in that moment?
You know, I'm not enough the way that I am for people to like me. I'm not good enough to make friends. I'm not 100%. Yeah. You know, the fact that I couldn't figure out how to get back on my own. I'm not actually sure what. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Cool. We're going to have a look at that. Hi, Corey.
Really good. How are you?
Good. What's news?
Well, what is news? I've got my flights for my husband coming home. Woohoo!
Mm-hmm.
He's actually coming back.
That's good.
And he's delaying when he's leaving, which is awesome. Which gives me time to talk with him, which will be great. And I've started to figure out how to put up boundaries and stop telling his side of the family information, which is hard for me because I need to connect with people.
Mm.
So I find it hard to, I mean, you know what I'm like. I just like to talk and tell everyone everything. So it's hard to not, you know, have that connection and stuff at the moment.
Mm.
But on the other hand, I was thinking about, you know, that need to please and, you know, be the right person, you know, be what everyone else thinks I should be. And I've just realised that I do that just to please everyone, and I'm going to stop doing that. It's going to do what needs to be done. So that's where I'm at mentally at the moment.
Mm,
Mm.
cool.
I have this like, it's like a fear that if I'm not pleasing people, then they won't think that I want them around. Is that weird?
Fear if I'm not pleasing people, they won't want me around.
No, they may think that I'm gonna have this fear that if I'm not pleasing people or I'm not doing what I think, I'm not doing what I think that they think I should do,
Mm,
then they're not going to think that I care. Is that confusing?
got it.
Hmm.
Cool. All right, eh? Anything specific you guys want to cover today?
Mm.
Happy to go with the flow.
Mm. Yeah.
Okay, how do we link these two together then? Yeah, okay. All right, we're gonna have a look at what Corey said to start. A lot of the thing that comes up there with you, Jess, we'll go through a fair bit of that when you're up at the event. So what's going on for you, Corey, is that you think that they think that you think that they think that you think something. Yeah, cool. Does that ever happen to you, Jess?
All the time.
Yeah. You see, what occurs is we have this monologue in our head which writes every single part of how things go. So we write our part, but then we write their response before they actually have their response, right?
Yeah.
So we go deeper and deeper and deeper into this entire virtual reality that we map out based on what we think that they think. What do you think I was doing before this?
Preparing.
How do I prepare?
Probably by reverting back to maybe what we're going through last week to try and predict what's happening this week.
Mm-hmm. What do you think I do, Jess?
You must follow, I guess, the next step. You know, that idea of how you talked about once you have the learning, going back to relearning the learning. That makes sense? Like, if you already know the answer, like with paradox, for example. Yeah, I hope that makes sense.
So what do you think I was doing just before this call?
Eating lunch.
And then before that? Yeah, and then before that?
Prepping.
Prepping?
Yeah, preparing yourself.
So the whole point is you think about what I think without actually knowing.
Yeah.
And the whole point is you give all of this emotional energy, all of this time, all this effort into what you think I think. So how much do you think I thought about this call before it started?
Now that I think about it, none.
Yeah, none. I literally finished my last call, went downstairs, put my food in the microwave, came back up, started eating it, and then started the call. The whole point is we create this entire narrative around all of these things, which are just distortions and educated guesses based on every experience you've had with me in the past. It's not actually reality. And the whole point is what we start to do is, based on our level of frequency, is going to determine how many rabbit holes that we go off on, how many tangents that we go on. Well, I think that I'm going to be thinking this, and then they're going to respond this, and then they're going to respond this, and this, and this, and this. And it goes off in this huge tangent. And within seconds, you're 10 conversations and responses deep. And that's all distortion. That's all this virtual reality that you've instantly created.
Yeah. And
in every one of those processes, we also then distort ourselves because we're also inauthentic in that. It's like, well, if they say this, then I'll say this. And it's like, well, I kind of want to please them a little bit more, so I probably shouldn't say that. So I'll say this instead. And then, no, but then they'll respond like this. And this is how our thoughts dart off in all these different areas. And this is what occurs when we're in our ego. That's our ego bouncing from one thing to the other. It's our ego going, do this. No, but don't do that though. Don't do that, because what will they think when I do that then? How will I look? How can I please them? Like, I've got to be safe. You need to be able to do this to be able to be safe. You need to be able to please them. And then the ego then comes in as well and goes, you know what, fuck that. I'm not going to please anyone. Fuck them. It's the same thing, right? It's the same mechanism because it's based on the energetic frequency at which we're at that moment in time. So what we look at is, rather than buying into every one of those fear-based thoughts which are created, we look at, all right, what's the frequency that I bring to that thought process? And how do I then raise my frequency? Because then the quietening of those little tangents is going to occur much more.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah.
And part of this mechanism shows up because of that deeply ingrained need to consistently please people, to be able to fit in, which then links back to your story, Jess. It's like, well, I just don't fit in that instance.
Yeah.
So then it's like, all right, well, I'm going to create this strategy of, I'm going to find a way that I then fit in. I'm going to put on an act. I'm going to play small so I fit in. I'm going to put a cap on my potential, because if I stand out, well, then I'll be ostracized, right? So it's like, that's an interesting payoff. I get to play small then, right? I get to sabotage myself, right? And when I do that, then there's just an impact of that. There's nothing wrong or right with that. There's just an impact. There's an impact of me playing small, meaning that I just don't live up to my potential. That becomes the impact of it. And then that becomes what I become addicted to. Then the question is, what do you ultimately want to create? Do you want to create a fear-based reality? Then what do you want to create? Because if we look at the levels of consciousness based on our fear, anything below courage is going to be ego-based. Our fear is something which ultimately just keeps us where we are. It creates this paralyzing it's even like this intoxicating experience. We get so drunk on the neurotransmitters that are released when we're in fear that we don't actually take any action. We're just basically high on fear. We're intoxicated by it. We're in this world of limitation. This fear then keeps us exactly where we are, because then we begin to actually feed it, because one thought process leads to the other. Because what happens is, what will people think of me is like the pride of it. It's like, well, how will I look? And then it's like, fuck that. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to, nah, I don't care anymore. Don't care. Fuck them. And it's like, oh, well, I kind of want to be this person over here where I desire something and I lack something at the same time. And I'm afraid of what might happen in the future. And I feel like I've probably lost a few opportunities in the past. So I'm in grief of where I've kind of sold out on my potential. And then it's just like, oh, that's just kind of the way that it is. And I've dropped down to apathy, resignation. And then I kind of guilt myself for anything that I did or didn't do. And then I instantly make myself a bad person. And that is a 3-second process. So we've gone through all of those different steps, bounce from one to the other, consistently going from pride to anger to desire or lack, same thing, fear, grief, apathy, guilt, shame. We bounce from one to the other, which creates this negative gravitational pull on our entire experience. And we bounce from one to the other. So what we can begin to look at is, how do we actually start to step out of that? We can go through any of these points above courage. We can have the courage to be vulnerable, to be able to step out of that. We can create that it's okay and be in neutrality. We can actually start to step into the thing that we're actually resisting willingly, to be able to get into that willingness and get to that point of acceptance, and then to reason of the understanding behind it, and then the actual love of that experience, and then the unconditional love of that experience, of the joy of 540, or that frequency of 600 of absolute peace. So what we look at in any of those instances is, what is my energetic frequency that is having this thought process come up? If someone is in fear and anxiety, well, then that becomes what they're actually addicted to in that instance. They're getting that intoxication payoff of those neurotransmitters of that. When we think about that, that pain can be more addictive than the pleasure. And some people connect the pain with the pleasure. So the more pain they're in, the more pleasurable it is, because it makes them feel alive. That's like the rise of, what is it? BDSM culture after, what was that book that came out? 50 Shades of Grey. Created this culture of people that create this connection to pain being pleasure in that instance. It's the same thing that people do on a psychological level when they're in fear, when they're in grief, when they're in apathy, when they're being a victim. There is this payoff that people start to get based on where they sit, and it's all driven by each of these low level frequencies. And today we'll look at that fear around it, because we fuel our fear when we give it our attention. And when we're in that fear, we bounce from one thing to the other. It's like, well, this is what they're going to think about me, and then this is what I'll think about that, and then that's what my response is going to be. And we go on this massive tangent between all these different experiences, bouncing from one thought to the other without them actually ever saying anything. So we create this entire reality of all of these different expectations and attachments before they even see a word, or before we even see them most of the time. How many times have you had a conversation or argument with someone, and then like 3 hours later you're like, fuck, I should have said that? Would have fucking owned them. No, just me.
I've done it many times.
Not you, Jess? Is it just an activator thing?
Oh, yeah. No, of course. No.
The whole point there is what we're actually doing is we're feeding our emotions. And what we often do is we feed our fear. We give it all of our energy. We give it all of our attention. And the whole point is we're actually giving a label to it. Because when we actually label it, it gives it an entire world and it creates this world of limitation for us. If we were just to say, I'm experiencing this sensation in my body, well, then it would pass much faster, wouldn't it? Rather than feeding it consistently. The same thing occurs when we have that thinking about what they will think about us thinking about what they're thinking. We can again give that even more attention and feed it even more. Well, that just gives it more energy. It's like fanning the flames. The more oxygen you give it, the more it's going to burn. So what we begin to become aware of in that instance is what creates that mechanism. What creates that fear? Well, that becomes created by any belief that we have, that we buy into. Our belief that we are not enough creates this entire fear system that when I have something, then I'll be enough. It's this external representation of me actually doing that, but then I consistently chase that. Well, when I have friends, then I'll be enough. When I play small, then I'll be enough. If I sabotage myself and I don't stand out, then I will be enough. And the reality is this just becomes the mechanism that actually just keeps us exactly where we are. It comes back to that belief that we buy into that keeps us exactly where we are. So what we can begin to become aware of is, all right, cool, where do we just sit? Where do we sit on the scale? Well, cool. The need to struggle and the need to fit in are right next to each other here, right? Goes the needs to be a victim down here, which we consistently do. I become a victim of my thoughts in that instance. And then I also then buy into the need to look good, which stops me moving forward. Then I can't actually even get to the point of struggling. But then when I'm struggling, it's like, well, I need to fit in those. So I'm not going to struggle too much. I'm going to struggle as much as I can without actually showing people that I'm struggling, right? Because I have to fit in. I can't stand out. And then we have these anchors of not being enough down here. That enoughness of that shame that we sit in. Because if I'm not enough, then that's based on the mechanism of shame. So all that we see is all the different representations throughout all these different points on this map. We see them all play out all at once. And then we also see, all right, well, what's my predominant thought process there? Am I focused on what I want to have, what I want to do, or who I want to be? Or even who I am being, or what I am doing, or what I am having, or want to have? For the directional frequency of these thoughts determines what our results are. If we're only ever focused on having, if we focus on having as our primary thought, well, that means that we only ever be in that victim mentality. It's like, I need to have a partner that loves me. I need to have a partner which supports me. I need to have a partner which feels what I feel. Well, that creates a low level frequency here, right? Because then that's all that you experience. That's why people that are focused on the having are often in that lower level, down towards depression, down towards being in apathy, resignation. When we start to begin to see ourselves at source here, we start to be able to step out of that. It's like, well, what would I need to do to be able to have a partner like that? We've gone from it being happening to me, to being a passenger, to being the source of it, but then it being the source of it and finding the lesson of it. Then it then starts to occur through me. Then I just experience that. And then I start to step into those higher levels again of who would I need to be that I would automatically do those things? Would I be a loving partner? Well, then I would automatically take the actions a loving partner takes. Then I would automatically have a partner where I'm loving in that instance, right? If our focus and our thought process and the order of our thoughts goes, I want to have this, and then you only ever focus on the having, then you're in destination disease. You'll be when I have this, then I'll be happy. If it's up here, it's like, right, well, what do I need to do to be able to do that? Yeah, awesome. Then that just means that we're in the default or the driver kind of frame of reference here. We start to get faster results, and yet it's still a struggle. So then in that instance, Jess, for you, what's occurring is the need to struggle, but not struggle too much is there. Because if you struggle too much, how much are you going to stand out, right? You're not going to fit in at all, then, are you? And you already have this belief of, I already don't fit in. I'm already not enough. So to be enough, I have to do these things differently. I have to put on this act. That's just a perfect example of like, you've been in that driver mindset. That next level is letting go of that need, the need to struggle, the key word being the need there. And then moving to that next level of seeing what that next level is, which is the need to fit in. And this changes based on every area of our life. There are certain areas of our life where we're a victim. So what we consistently do is we consistently evolve through the process to be able to let go of those things where we're at those lower levels, which are creating these anchors, these lower states of consciousness, to be able to then start to reach into those higher levels. So what's occurring in that instance, Corey, means that you become a victim of your thoughts. And then there's no action, because when you're in the victim mentality, you're in the dreamer mentality. Because what's actually occurring there is you're dreaming up that conversation.
Yeah.
That's not actually happening. You're dreaming up what actually occurs. And we all do this all day, every day. We create this dream of this virtual reality, which plays out all of these different parts in our head. This dream is something that we buy into, that we see as real. Yeah, you hear this all the time of like women that like slap their boyfriend because their boyfriend cheated on them in their dream.
Really?
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Because what happens is you buy into this dream and you see it as reality. And the reality is it's just a virtual reality that you've created. And it never actually happened.
That is pretty ridiculous though.
It's the way that the world is, because we have this dream which we're consistently creating, which is not actually what's going on. Even right now, you're actually dreaming in this moment. Because what you're actually doing is you're listening to what I'm saying, and then you're filtering it through your filtering mechanisms and distorting that into your different view of reality. So it's creating this completely different process to what I'm actually saying. So in that instance, you're actually dreaming in every single moment. The whole point is when you buy into that dream, it creates this world of limitation for you. And when you buy into the dream of other people, that's when it gets even more limiting. because you're not even creating it. You're buying into what other people's dream is or their virtual reality. All of their distortions start to show up. So as someone then says something like, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't work with that company, you shouldn't do this, well, that's just part of their virtual reality. That's their dream based on all of their internal conversations that they've had with themselves to be able to actually create that entire virtual reality or that dream of what's going on in their life. And that's because it's gone through all of their distortions. It's gone through all of their pain, all of their suffering that they hold on to, that they don't want to go through again. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You can see where that applies to you?
Yeah.
So in that instance, it's just like, all right, well, where do we sit on this scale? Where am I being a victim of myself? So in that instance, it's like you're a victim of your thoughts. But at the same time, you're also a victim of what other people's thoughts are, which is here, which becomes that perfect example of the next step, which is the need to look good. What will other people think of me? So the whole point is you're a victim of your thoughts here, but then it's like, well, what will they think of me? But then I also then become a victim of what they will think of me or what I will think they will think of me.
Mm-hmm.
So when we think about this dream, what's the purpose of this dream?
To understand what's happening.
It's not what's happening, that's the thing.
Or to understand, I don't know. To make sense of. Trying to make sense of something before it happens.
Mm. I wouldn't say it's making sense of something. It's just something that we innately create because this is the function of our ego.
Mm.
You see, animals don't have an ego. They just live in their animalistic nature. Well, technically they only live in their ego, really, because they live in fight, flight, or freeze. They live in this pack mentality. Have you ever seen like these fish that all swim together and they all turn at the same time and they all move perfectly together?
Yeah.
In the school of fish? Well, how do they do that? How do they know when the other fish are going to actually do it?
Senses.
They do it because they're all connected on deeper level because they're not allowing the mind to run everything. The animalistic nature actually has that element of connection. We don't have that because our ego instantly fights with who we are as people. So that means that we can begin to actually evolve by actually learning from our ego for all the things that it then triggers us of. But the whole point is, well, why do we then have the ego? Why do we then create this dream? We know that animals have that different experience. Well, then the purpose of that dream, what does it actually create? Well, we all create a dream, right? So what are we creating? Well, if we all have a dream, we're all creating one. we can then actually just see it as our view of the world. Our dream becomes, no, we're not ready for that apparently because I can't find that slide. All right, that'll be in that deck at least.
Mercury retrograde.
Bloody Mercury retrograde. So when we think about stepping into, that's not even there. Again. So why do we create that dream? Well, we create that dream because it becomes this perspective of how we see the world. Comes back to what we talk about when we've got this virtual reality that we've created. We've created this entire perspective of how we see the world. We've created that virtual reality that we then begin to buy into, that we start to create as part of our experience. Becomes our entire life because we believe it is our life. It is the movie of our life. Because what we're consistently doing, and every single person that we come in contact with, we create this narrative of who they are, of what they bring to the table, of how they're going to argue with us, how they're going to hate us, how they're going to fight us, all of these different things. This movie becomes what our life actually is. Becomes this dream reality. And this is where it starts to get into what happens when virtual reality goes mainstream. What happens when we have all 5 of our senses hooked into any experience that we have. Because if you're watching a movie here like this, you've only got certain senses. You don't have taste. You don't have touch. You don't have smell. But what happens when you have taste, touch, sight, sound, smell? What happens when you have all 5 of your senses? Well, you won't know the difference between your virtual reality and actual reality. And yet you already do this because you already have collapsed what your virtual reality is with actual reality. So you already live in a simulation. And when virtual reality gets to another point, then we'll be in a simulation of being in a simulation. So what we begin to look at is, well, why do we do that? Well, that actually becomes what we begin to actually create. It becomes the artwork that we start to create. Our dream is our masterpiece of our life. It's the movie of our life. It's the narrative of our life. It's the Morgan Freeman explaining what's going on in our life. And yet that's only one perspective. So it's this exactly the same as any kind of artwork that we create. It's always unique. There is no 2 pieces of art that are ever the same. Even if it's a reprint, it's slightly different. So when we look at our dream, we can consciously create what our dream is. We can consciously start to step into what our dream is. We can consciously utilize our dream to be able to create our entire reality. So then what's the reality that you're creating at the moment? And is that what it's actually aligned with, what you want to create? Is it a reality where you pay partial attention to things? Where you have a multifaceted brain where you focus on 100 different things at once? Well, that just means that you just don't experience things. you only partially experience things, which means you only get partially the results that you want. So when you create that undivided focus of being in that flow of that one thing that you're actually doing, you get the full experience of it and you get the full benefit of it. So we can observe, well, if the dream is creating everything on top of it, it's going from one thought to the other, to the other, to the other, to the other, to the other. All that does is distort the entire reality rather than actually being the experience of the experience that you're in. Coming into that present moment, into that flow experience. Because what you're really doing is you're becoming the creator of your entire experience. You become at source of being at source of your experience, which then becomes being at source of sourcing your entire experience by seeing yourself as source. So it creates this experience for you where you actually start to experience the things that you're experiencing rather than bouncing from one thing to the other. Because when we're bouncing from one thing to the other, it's often because we're getting pulled in all these different directions. Then we half-ass everything that we do. Then we miss out on the experience that we're actually looking to experience in that moment. So what occurs is if you focus on two things at once, you lose about, 30 or 40% of your productivity.
You're saying I'm not doing a good job.
And then as soon as you add a third task in, then you lose another 20% or so. So what instantly occurs is we think that we're doing multiple things at once, when the reality is we're giving out our energy, and because we're giving out in multiple different directions, it gets dispersed and we lose lots of it. Because if it's going here, here, and here, well, then there's going to be a certain amount of drop off between those 2 points. Because if we're giving all of our energy directly over here, as soon as we move to here, there's energy to be able to get to focus on that at the same time. And then again here. So when we have that complete focus on the thing that we're doing, without buying into what the dream is actually telling us of this, and this, and this, and all these distractions which pop up, we create that laser focus on what we're actually doing and where we're going. Then we start to move forward at the fastest rate possible. The limitation is that dream goes, what about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? And this happens much more with women.
Because men can't do two things at once.
Why does this happen more with women?
What does she call it?
Belief we buy into about the fact that we're meant to be able to do everything without breaking a sweat.
It's part of that.
No, because men mainly concentrate on
Men have tunnel vision.
Yeah, and concentrate on one task, whereas women do half-assed jobs on 100 tasks.
It's not that they do half-assed things, it's just that their ability to focus because things talk to them.
Like the washing.
So when it comes to women, women think, right, well, that needs to be done. So it's talking to me. It's like saying to me, you have to do this, 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 you have to do this. Until you do it, then it doesn't shut up. It's based on diffuse awareness. Tunnel vision versus diffuse awareness.
That's it. Diffuse awareness. I'm never going to remember that.
If that's what you say, that's what's going to happen.
You are very right.
So what we start to notice there is the tendency for these things to talk to you is only ever more of the ego, more of the fear, more of, if I don't do this, well, then I won't be pleasing people. So we get pulled in all these different directions, and you get distracted extremely easily. Like, all right, I'm going to go do this. No, I'm doing this, and this. That's extremely awesome in high stress situations, or when lives are at stake, i.e. if you're being a mother. The limitation is when you buy into that construct consistently, when lives aren't at stake, then it just creates a stress mechanism for you. So the awareness that we then have is, well, that is just another aspect of the dream experience that you're having. Because that narration is part of the ego. That's not to say that it's right or wrong, or it's good or bad that you have it. It's just something to become aware of and create that awareness to go, okay, awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm going to focus on this still. Because I also know that as soon as I add in that extra task, I start losing energy. There are two predominant times where it works extremely effectively. That's survival, when lives are at stake, and in delegating for project management. So if you're delegating for project management, then it's good to be able to know that, and then you're following up all these different people, but you're not actually doing any of it. Because what happens is, otherwise, all of these things are talking to you. You haven't done this on your website. You haven't done this over here. You've got to call that person. You have to do the washing. You have to cook dinner. You have to do all these different things, and they consistently talk to you. And we can just observe that and go, awesome. And I'm going to focus on this one thing and do this thing, then the next thing. When something is complete, or as complete as it can be, then you move to the next thing. Just like in a website, if you're building a website or something, it's like, what can I get to the furthest point of completion on this task that I can? Till I need to send it to the next person to then delegate, to get them to put something into it or whatever it is. So if we understand that mechanism, that becomes the dream that you then create. It's based on the narration of that thing, of that going from one thought to the thought about the thought. And will I think about what I'm thinking about then? So as soon as we're aware of that mechanism, we pull ourselves out of it and go, awesome, that is just a dream. And I can observe that dream, and I can start to change and mold that dream. If I'm already unconsciously creating that dream, then I can consciously start to create it. What's that? What's the name of a dream where you consciously start to change things in it?
Never heard of it.
Lucid
dream. Nailed it. A lucid dream where you can start to actually realize that you're actually dreaming, and then create within that, and you can create your experience.
Really?
Yeah.
A bit crazy.
So when you're actually when you're asleep and you're actually dreaming, and you become aware that you're dreaming, then you can start to create these things. It's like, oh, you know what I'd love to experience? Ice cream. Let's have some ice cream. And then this ice cream truck comes past.
Have you ever experienced that before?
Yeah.
Really?
It's creating, all it takes is creating the awareness of the distortion and the dream that you're actually creating. It's this occurring, what's actually occurring is too unrealistic for it to be anything but a dream. Let's start to play with that and start to try and mold different things. The same thing happens in our mind. We're creating this lucid dream experience of the dream that we're actually creating, which is all this distortion, this virtual reality that we create. We have that capability in our sleep as well as when we're actually awake. We're the creator of that entire experience. So what we start to do is become aware, right, this is the dream that I'm creating. Let's mold it. Let's get that focus awareness so that I can instantly get the most out of this. So I can wring every drip out of that experience rather than just leaving it as it is. And it's just like all this stuff's just leaking out. It's falling everywhere. We're losing all of this energy. We're losing all of this focus. Make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
So as we think about that, it comes back to the thought process of the thought about what other people think about what we think. So what occurs is we have what our first thought is. They have first thought, which is the first thing that comes through. Then we have our ego, which comes in on top of that almost instantly. Then it's like, well, what will they think about my thought? But they don't know what your thought is. The whole point is at the start of this call, you thought that I would be preparing for this, doing all these different things before I was on it, when the reality is I literally did not think about it. I finished my call, got food, and then got to my computer. And yet you created this entire virtual reality of what you thought was actually occurring based on one thing: assumptions.
Yeah.
Every distortion is based on assumption. And every assumption is bullshit. It's part of that dream world. It's going, well, this is what's occurred in the past, so I assume this is what's going to happen in the future. We buy into that belief, we buy into that construct, which creates this entire experience of the same thing actually happening again. It's like, well, this person's going to argue with me about this. They're going to come home and we're going to have the same argument. It's going to go the same time, the same way that it always goes, which then creates that actually occurring. When the reality is, when we start to step outside of that virtual reality, outside of that dream, we can begin to experience a new experience, because we've created the possibility of something different actually occurring. We're no longer filtering it through the past. We're no longer filtering it through all these different worlds of limitation. We're filtering it through possibility. All those assumptions are the things which create all of our limitation. Every expectation, every attachment is also an assumption. We have an expectation, we're assuming something's going to happen. We expect it to happen, which then actually occurs, which actually means that it often does happen in a negative way, because it's like, oh, I expect them to respond like this. Then they actually respond like that because you've created the energetic frequency of communicating based on that level. So they only respond based on that level. So what then occurs is we can go, all right, well, what if I could bring a high level of frequency to that? What if I could bring a level of unconditional acceptance or unconditional love in that instance? What if I could then bring those higher levels of consciousness to that conversation? How would they then show up? Because if I'm assuming, then what I'm really doing is I'm bringing all of these lower levels into it. I'm assuming, well, this is what happened in the past, this is what's going to happen in the future. Whether I desire that or lack that, don't want that, it still shows up because it's based on the energetic frequency that you bring to it. That's why many people's fears come to fruition, because they bring that energetic frequency to it, that it bounces from one fear to another. So if we have a fear of success or a fear of failure or both, well, no shit, because it's going to bounce from one to the other because it's based on that energetic frequency. So at the same time, we've got one part of us over here, I'm really afraid of just failing. And over here, it's like, I'm really afraid of succeeding. So we're stuck in the middle. And then what that comes down to is just understanding, well, where do you sit based on those beliefs that we talked about before, based on those other sections? Where do you sit on that scale? Are you holding on to the need to struggle, or what will people think of you, and the need to fit in? Because if you fit in, then you can't stand out, right? This is why it starts to get to this higher level here, because if you need to fit in, well, then you're going to start to sabotage your success. You're going to get to a point, and then you'll just keep bumping yourself below that. You get to a point, bump yourself down. Get to a point, bump yourself down. And this is what consistently happens. We push ourselves down, we play small because we need to fit in. We get some success and we work our ass off for it, and we stop moving to that because we have to struggle. We have to make it hard. It has to be a challenge for us. But then we push that as much as we can. So we start doing things here where we're actually struggling for the sake of struggling. We're not struggling for the sake of the result. There are many ways that we could do it more efficiently and more effectively to be able to get the exact same result. And when we let go of that need to struggle and we start to look for ways to be able to get into more flow to make it even more effortless in every part of our experience, then we start to move into getting flow on demand and then being actually in more demand. We don't necessarily work less at these higher levels. We have more energy. We have more capacity to be able to get more done. The time mechanism does not change. The results change. The whole point is if you need to fit in, then there's no potential to be able to move to that next level. So it's understanding these primal beliefs that we buy into, the need to be a victim. Could be of our thoughts, could be of our circumstance, could be of our partner, could be of our clients, could be of our family. But then as soon as we start to be no longer become a victim, I'm responsible for that. But then it's like, but then what will they think of me? And it's got to be hard in my relationship. If it's not hard, then it's not worth it, right? Well, that just depends on the belief that you start to have. So what we look at there is, do we just bounce around in these lower levels? What's the frame of reference that we bring to it? What's the energetic frequency that we bring to it? Do we bring one of unconditional love of any experience that we're actually in? Or do we create conditionality to that? Do we create fear around the experience that we're in? Do we create fear around, well, do we have the belief that if I was successful, then I'd lose my friends? If I was successful, then I wouldn't fit in. Because wherever we're at, we have a belief system which is aligned with that based on the energetic frequency of it. So your results are indicative of what your beliefs are. So if you want more results, well, it's like, let's look at the belief system. Let's look at the beliefs that you're holding on to. Let's start to create breaks of those beliefs to be able to access the infinite potentiality that you always have access to, the infinite amount of love that is always available to you if you choose to focus on that. Or the alternative is you can focus on how you're a victim, how it's happening to you, how your partner, how your client, how yourself is doing something to you. Because even as we start to look at that, the thought process is, well, I'm addicted to it, so I'm doing it to myself. But then we become a victim of ourselves and we shame ourselves. Oh, I shouldn't do that, right? then our view of the world in that instance becomes the predominant thing that we begin to look at. Is it happening to me? Is it happening with me? Am I the passenger on that path? Am I the person who actually starts to create that? Is it happening from me? Is it happening from me with an empowering context? Is it just something that happens through me? Does life just happen? Is it something that we can begin to observe? And do we become a source of the source in that instance? Do we become at source of being at source, of sourcing our entire experience by seeing ourselves as source? We can instantly start to see wherever we sit based on these different things. No position is wrong or right, it's just a different position. We can begin to become aware of that. We can begin to notice when that voice starts to arc up and we go from one thought to the next thought, which is actually just our dream. And then our dream goes to the next thought, 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 which instantly pulls us back down into this dreamer victim example here. There's no movement towards certain things. We might go all the way up here into that flow area and in demand, or even being a driver, and then we pull ourselves back to here to not taking action on certain things. We can sabotage ourselves, which can drop us to this dreamer level, or being a victim in that instance, going right back to it happening to me. I'm doing it to myself. So we can see how this fluctuates between the different levels and how this process can evolve within seconds. And that can be seconds that it goes from being up here to down here with a downward spiral down. And we can sit in that low level if we choose to, or we can just spiral it back up. We can instantly go, okay, this dream that I'm creating, this virtual reality, this screen of existence, which I'm filtering everything through, well, it's just a dream. So what if I could take a step back from that? What if I could just observe that? What if I could notice that fear and go, awesome. I love that I'm experiencing that fear, because what happens in fear is I can start to have the courage to just step through it. I can love that I have that fear, for it creates the next level of spiritual evolution for me. Make sense? What do you guys take out of that? Yes.
Yeah, I can. It's the levels. I can see again dropping back into that dreaming phase and victimhood, doing it to myself.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing, like we're consistently just evolving throughout these different processes, and the awareness of it becomes how we start to then tap into our power again. Because previously it's just these things, we just see it, that's just how it happens. That's just the resignation of it. That's just what happens, right? Oh, well, I do these different things, and then that happens, and then this happens, and then before I know it, I'm in this big tangent of breakdown, and then I don't know what to do about it. So all that we start to notice is, all right, cool. Where am I currently at this? We can measure this on a moment by moment basis. I can instantly go, all right, well, do I need to fit in this instance? Is that why in that instance, I want to start to drop back down to it's happening to me. I'm sabotaging myself. I'm doing these things. Because then if I'm a victim of myself, then I'm going to stay where I am and it's going to be comfortable. Then I'm going to survive. What does that create for us? So we can instantly just start to use it as a tool to go, all right, well, where do I sit? Where can I then be aware of where I'm at the moment, and then instantly go, all right, what's the next step? Who would I be to be someone who doesn't fit in. And even in that, we're actually creating the perpetuation of that, because fitting in or not fitting in is still based on the same energetic frequency. Who would I be that removes the need to fit in? Would I be someone who creates an impact on the world? Would I be someone who takes a stand for other people? Would I be someone who influences other people? And then what would I actually do in that instance? Would I automatically do things that were required to be able to create that? And then what would that mean that I then have? And then that directional thought process becomes the essential component of that. What is required is that directional frequency. That's not going to look so good. Let's do it like this one. So that directional frequency is consistently moving down in terms of our thought process. We start with, who would I be? Who is me? How would I describe that? Then how would I actually do that? And how would I have that? You see, people down here ask certain questions. They ask, why me? Down the bottom, it's why me? Up the top, the other end of the spectrum, that's still why. Fuck it, let's add this in, hey? So I would say, why I do this. Why me? How do I? Yeah, why me? So the predominant questions are going to be like this. It's going to be like, why me? Why I do this is because of my legacy. Why I do this is because the impact I want to have. Why I do this is because I need to be successful and I need to struggle. So how do I do it? Someone screenshot this? Was that a different thing?
No, that was me.
I can send you this as an A4 printout thing if you want.
I'm sorry. I just wanted the graph.
That's what I meant.
Oh.
I can send you this as an A4 printout. It's in the group.
Oh, cool. Awesome.
It'll just be better quality.
Okay.
Cool. So the different questions that we start to ask then is why I do this and who would I be? Who would I be so that I would automatically do it? How do I do it? Why do I do it down here is based on the lower level frequency. I'm still asking why, but I'm not asking why as an element of wanting to do it. I'm asking why as an element of judgment. Are you eating ice cream again?
Yeah.
Man.
What's wrong with these?
I'm gotta go to Coles and get me some.
Yeah, they're so good, eh?
Yeah. Hi.
That was Taylor.
Hey, Taylor.
He has disappeared. He's embarrassed.
So what we begin to become aware of is just where we sit at any point in time. The lower we are here, the louder that internal voice is going to be, the louder our ego is going to be. The louder it's going to bounce from one thing to the other. Because when we're in those lower states, then these are the frequencies that we're in. The highest we get to is here. The highest we get to is that need to look good, that pride. So what occurs in that instance is we just start to fall back into our old tendencies because we know down here is safe, right? We know we're going to survive. And here's the kicker. The need to be safe is based on the fear. The fear of letting go. Because when we're in the fear of letting go, we're in this low level frequency. When we're in the love of actually letting go, then we just let go. Down here, it's like, well, if I let go, well, who will I be? What will I do? How will I even be successful? Will I lose everything? Do I have to give up everything? Well, that's just the mechanism of fear. The reality is when we love every experience that we're in, for it's just the experience that we're experiencing in that moment, which is all part of the human experience, which is the experience of being human and our humanness and our experienceness of being human. Well, then we instantly come from that high level frequency, right? Because we're using paradox to be able to remove the construct of the ego on these lower levels. We go from being in the fear of what if to just being. We start to move through the process of being driven by a fear to being driven by peace, joy, love, reason, acceptance. So it comes down to what's the energetic frequency that we come from? Because that's going to determine how loud that voice is, how many things get arced up. And there's also that natural tendency, as we talked about in terms of for women, for those things to talk to you. And again, that comes from that awareness of knowing that's just part of the survival mechanism, which is the ego. So if we understand that it's just part of our survival mechanism, then there's no possibility of making it wrong, right? We get to love that part of us. We get to love that experience that we experience in that moment. We get to love that we're experiencing the experience of that sensation that we have, knowing that it's only a sensation. And if it's only a sensation, then we don't even need to get into the labeling of that. Well, then it's going to pass like that. Because when we label something like fear, which is in reality just a sensation, we actually give it fuel. Because we've created a belief around what fear is and what fear does. And the reality is it's just a sensation. Why is it that some people crumble under pressure and some people like do best under pressure?
I work better under pressure.
Mm-hmm. Why?
Because I work well under stress.
Mm-hmm. Why?
If there's a deadline, you got to get it done. And so you just...
What about you, Jess? What do you think about deadlines?
Deadlines. Yeah, I work better with deadlines generally. Better if I set them.
So what occurs is a deadline is just a deadline. It's just a belief that we buy into. It just depends on the energetic frequency that which we're at. It also determines on what our label of fear actually is, because the fear of not getting it done can allow us to get quite a bit done at a low level frequency. We can force our way through that. We can also drive our way through it at higher levels. Drive here. We can force our way through it here, use that deadline, and we can use a deadline here as well, still the same thing, and drive through it. It determines what is the energetic frequency that we're at. So if we're at a low level frequency down here, well, we can get a lot of things done and get it done by the deadline. And when we come from this place up here, well, then there's less distractions. It happens at a faster rate. We're in that flow. We get that complete focus and we just drive for that one thing. That allows us to experience the experience that we're in again. Which then allows us to move at the fastest rate possible. So what we look at with these is, these are just, did I talk about this last week? These are the same as gears. Yeah, cool. So what gear do you want to be in? Do you want to be in first, second, third, fourth, or fifth? And how quickly can you change between them? Because life is full of ups and downs. It's full of curves, just like on a road where you're consistently changing up and down, up and down, up and down. And if you can get up to fifth on a straight and go there for as long as possible and drop fourth, third, second, first, second, all the way back up really quickly, well, then you get things done much faster and you get around that lap much faster, right? Get more done. Get it more done efficiently as well. But if you drop back, well, then it just slows down. You still get things done. It's just slow. So do you want to do it the fast way or the slow way? No response? Okay. We'll go slow then. I'll go slow. I'll just start talking much slower in future. Does anyone else like use Audible? Do you guys listen to audiobooks much?
Yeah.
So I started like, for a while there on certain books, I'd like just have it at one speed, but now it's just like way too slow.
Oh no.
But notice. So now it's like, I listen to most things on like 1.75. And I think it means that I speed up how I talk a lot more as well now.
Really?
Yeah, because I'm just like, that's just how my brain works. It's like you've created a new normal in it. So the new normal is like, well, I'm used to being in fourth gear here. Then I just do everything that I can in fourth and just pumping it through.
I tried to speed up and I couldn't listen to it. I was like, no, it just needs to be on normal. Otherwise it just sounds ridiculous.
I couldn't handle it. I had to speed it up. I'm like, this is... Yeah.
So in that instance, Corey, what we want to look at is if you go from first to fifth, it's not going to work. So it's like 1, 1.25, 1.5, and then move it up slowly from there because your brain starts to then catch up.
Okay. And it starts to sound normal?
Yeah.
Really?
Like, yeah.
Even in chipmunk mode?
It's again just conditioning our brain to the speed at which it works, because if we're used to being in first and putting around at 20 or 30 k's an hour, cool, that's going to be easy.
Yeah.
So what we start to do is we start to expand our capacity. It's like, what's the next step here? How can I start to let go of these things to be able to expand my capacity? Because regardless of all of these things, life still happens at the same exact speed, same rate. All the same things are still going on. Up here, your ability to be able to then move and adapt and evolve and grow is just exponentially faster. Down here, that is super slow. People can sit in these lower states for months, years. Up here, even when you're in they talk about like, even when people are enlightened in this higher state up here, they still have thoughts that they instantly just observe and disconnect with, create non-attachment to, that could be considered negative. They just observe them. The whole point is they don't allow that to run the show. So their ability to be able to go from there to here and back up is instantaneous. This becomes our power based on the time that we sit in a higher level and then go to a lower level. Because if we're sitting in these lower levels, well, that just means that we just slow down. That's all it is. Or come to a complete halt. So then we go back to these lower levels here, and it's like, well, we're not actually moving at all. We're actually just in that pain, that suffering, and just sitting there and just doing nothing, just dreaming, just being the passenger to the entire experience here, or just being depressed. Make sense? Any questions with that? What do we take out of that then?
Wake the fuck up and stop thinking about crap and making up stories in your head.
So when we think about that, it's not stop doing that, because you're going to keep doing that. It's notice that you're doing that and be aware that you're doing it and move past it.
Okay.
Jess?
Yeah, I'm just noticing when those things that are coming up for me, supporting this now.
Love it. Cool. Might wrap it up there then, eh?
Awesome.
Thanks,
That's
Cody.
good.
Thanks, Cody.
Thanks, Jess. Thanks, Cody.
Thanks, Laura.
Yeah. Thanks, Laura. On her blank screen.
Just eating, activator style. Love
I
it.
was gonna say.
Oh, love it. Homework. Everyone loves homework. Start to notice how many times you get into the thought about a thought about a thought. So it's just the noticing and then going, oh, that's just a virtual reality. Awesome. I can go and do something else now. Sound good?
And have some long stories for you next week.
Love it.
Awesome.
All right. Enjoy the rest of the day.
See you guys.
Bye.
Thanks, Cody.